introduce myself, my name is Hov. H to the OV. I used to move snowflakes by the OC. I guess even back then you can call me CEO of the ROC. Ho, fresh out the frying pan into the fire. I be the music biz #1 supplier. Fly it in a piece of paper bearing my name. Got the hottest chick in the game wearing my chain. That's right, ho.
Welcome to Two Bros, One Book. I'm Lloyd.
And I'm Will.
This week we are doing a rare treat, a new Bill Bryson book. It's called The Body, A Guide for Occupants. Will, why don't you tell us a bit about this book in terms of the what's covered in this book?
Sure. So Bill Bryson kind of takes us on a tour of the human form, kind of blending science, history, lots of fascinating trivia together, like many of his other books, actually. The book is divided into chapters that explore the body's major systems, organs and functions, while also unpacking the latest kind of scientific discoveries while sharing bizarre historical stories about medicine, surgery, and generally humans' quest to understand itself. The body is kind of a celebration, I would say, of the everyday miracle that keeps us alive, both a tribute to human resilience and a reminder of just how fragile, mysterious, and utterly astonishing we really are.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's I would say that's a takeaway that you can expect from almost any Bill Bryson book is like aren't people weird? And
Yes.
one of my favorite books from him is A Short History of Nearly Everything. I think that's like his
Same.
that's his mega hit, right?
That kind of got me into Bill Bryson, I would say.
Me as well. I mean, I'd already read actually a couple of his books, his travel books, when he was known more as a travel writer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, at one time, I mean, he was a newspaper guy, a columnist for a while, and he wrote some travel logs, let's say. And he became somewhat known for a book called A Walk in the Woods. Have you read that one?
I haven't, but I have heard of it. It's on my list. I know that he's traveled a lot around the UK, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he wrote Notes from a Small Island. He wrote Notes from a Big Country. He wrote a book called In a Sunburned Country about Australia. So he's sort of actually, it's interesting because his fame is sort of indifferent a little bit in each country. Because like in the U.S., I would say he became known first, most prominently for this book, A Walk in the Woods, which is about backpacking in the Appalachian Trail.
Oh, that's sick. That's cool.
Yeah. And it was with a friend of his who was also a character in a previous book, which had not really done that well.
He would be such an interesting dude to hang around with and to have as a travel companion. Could you imagine? Did you listen to the book, by the way?
This one, yeah.
Because he read it. I love his accent. It's so strange.
Because he moved to the UK when he was only, and it's in one of his books. He talks about it. He moved to the UK when he was only 22 or 23.
Okay.
So he did kind of like me, which is like, he went backpacking right after college and he kind of went, I like it here.
Well, you do get a bit of a twang, actually, Lloyd, sometimes, like certain words when I'm hanging out with you a bit too much. You start kind of regressing into some old British lingo.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't end up settling in the UK, but it was a similar thing. It was sort of like, oh, this is interesting. I don't want to stop. I don't want to go back. Mm-hmm. And then he moved back to the US for about 10 years, and he wrote some more books. That's when he did the Appalachian Trail book. And then he moved back to the UK, and he's known in the UK also for his conservation efforts. I don't know if you
That's
know
right.
about that.
Yeah.
Which he's had run-ins with people like Jeremy Clarkson in the past, the guy from Top Gear, because Clarkson, of course, is like one of these British conservatives who wants to, I don't know, cut down the forests and demolish all the all the historical monuments or whatever, anything in the name of capitalism. But now he's a farm conservationist, I guess.
Apparently, yeah. I have watched his what's it called? Diddley Squat Farm.
Oh
It's
yeah,
funny. I find him hilarious. But as I've got older, I have begun to detest certain aspects of his personality. Let's say.
yeah. So Bryson's a bit of a character, not so much in this book. This is one of those books where he's not playing a huge role. He's just he's talking to a few experts. He's taking a few trips.
But his personality comes out, and
mm,
his wit comes through the words, for sure.
I actually, it was interesting when I was listening to this book. I very often was thinking I would really like, one of these chapters. There was something about, maybe it was about the scale of this book, because of
Hmm.
course, he did a short history of nearly everything, which is like a history of science. Then he does At Home. Did you read that one?
I haven't. It's on my list.
I would say At Home is a better book, because what he does with At Home is he tries to explain the the kind of history of domesticity, like the idea of the home and what it is, and how rooms evolved, and how living evolved with human beings.
Hmm.
And he does that by exploring his own house. So he said, now I'm in the hallway. What is a hall? How did it, or in the bedroom, and then talking about bedrooms, and then it that goes to what, sex, family size, all this stuff,
Hmm.
colonialism. So it had, it was like the house or the home was like a vector for talking about the broader world.
Hmm.
And I felt this book somewhat restrained in this sense of it was focusing mostly on giving you a complete picture of the human body, and it does succeed in that, and it succeeds in sort of giving you a really good sense that human beings are quite absurd,
Hmm.
and our bodies are quite absurd, and and a lot of it doesn't make a lot of sense, that
Hmm.
you get a good sense of that. But each chapter, each section, I was thinking, God, I would really like a book about this. Like, I
Hmm.
would really like a book about disease. He
Sure.
has one section on disease, and I was like, now I want a book about disease, the concept of disease.
Hmm.
So to me, like, I was constantly feeling like everything was foreshortened or overly simplified in a way.
Interesting.
Even though
Hmm.
the scope of the book is narrower in the sense of it's only the body, but it was not as I don't know. It it didn't have the same kind of quality of a story that I was
Hmm.
hoping for.
So less of a narrative, perhaps less of a potent message, underlining the
Yeah,
text,
I
maybe.
mean the
Hmm.
message mainly is like the human body is quite crazy and weird, but yeah, but I didn't get a clear sense of what the message was.
I get that. I do. I did find though the book to be gripping enough. Certain facts in there. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I learned a hell of a lot. By the way,
Yeah.
there was a lot of stuff in there that I didn't know. I found it just parts mind blowing, which kept me turning the pages. Um, I d-
What were the main sort of things that you that
oh,
that
I
sort of did
mean,
it for you?
I think he perhaps starts the book. I can't remember exactly where it was talking about microbes. I think it's something like 37 bit, not billion. I think it's might be trillion
Mm-hmm.
human cells,
Yeah.
but it also harbors at least as many microbial cells.
Yeah.
So we're as much of something else as we are of us, as it were. Like there's more, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
more living things within us that build up our body weight than there are actually, that we can directly attribute to our bodies.
Yeah,
And
and I found it interesting that he was talking about the fact that it's possible that we have been over the past decades killing off our microbes
Yeah.
with medicines and with different practices like having C-sections electively, which causes certain microbes not to be passed along to the baby.
I mean,
And
there seems to be a theme here across all kinds of technology. Technology that we use every day on our phones, but also even medicine. And I very much got that from reading this book, that are kind of stopping us from being human, detaching us from our core biology and our core, the way that our minds fundamentally through evolution work is really being compromised by technology. And look, we know that anyway, right? Through
yeah,
our social media and through many other things that we do on a daily basis. But I didn't realize it was such the case in this context as well. And clearly, the medicines we're taking, the habits we're accumulating over time, are kind of pulling us away from conventional evolution. At least I don't really know what that is anymore, actually. Maybe we can
yeah.
talk about that. But yeah, I found that quite interesting as well, which I took away from this book.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the kind of thing that I felt like needed, a whole book where it was like the immune system, uh, talking about the microbes, talking about the
Mm.
antibiotics, talking about bacteriophages.
Mm.
I didn't know there's more biodiversity within bacteriophages, which are
Yeah.
viruses that impact bacteria, than there is in almost any other part of the of the kingdoms of life. Like there's bacteriophages everywhere,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
I
Uh,
remember reading that. Yeah, mind blowing.
and we don't, yeah, and we didn't even know that they existed for until fairly recently.
Mm.
So like this whole level of the of the way life works with bacteria transmitting viruses between each other, we had no idea.
Mm.
And that yeah, strongly impacts our health.
Mm.
I did find it interesting that also that we've known for a while, I guess it's been sort of common knowledge that antibiotics are being overused and killing our flora
Mhm.
in our bodies, and that we don't really know what the impact of that is going to be. But that actually, simple infections may, or all, I found this interesting, already are killing people at a higher rate than they used to.
Mm.
Right. So we're already like, if penicillin was sort of isolated in the 1920s and 30s, uh, by about 1960, it was kind of at its peak of effectiveness, and since then it's actually been going down,
Mm.
which is kind of crazy. Actually, for most of the time that we've had antibiotics, their effectiveness has been decreasing.
Mm.
So
Well, and I feel like there's recently, perhaps because of COVID, but there's been a lot of scaremongering. I've been reading a lot of articles about how the next big threat in that department, at least, is going to be bacteria rather than viral.
yeah,
Um,
I,
and
I,
I'm
I would
kind of
say
surprised actually it wasn't perhaps a little more topical on that, given COVID and how everyone's just gone through that.
it seemed to
Um,
me that the book was written before COVID, right? It came
when
out.
was it published? Actually, I don't know.
Let me
Let's
take
have
a
a
look.
look.
I'm looking at the listing. It was 2020. So it came out right, but
Okay.
it was published in 2019.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, it came end of 2019. Very bad timing for this book,
Literally.
or good. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting that he has this one chapter on global pandemic.
Yeah, I noticed. Yeah.
Saying we're just waiting for a global pandemic, and then it literally probably happened a month later.
Mm.
So that's kind of wild.
Yeah. He was talking a lot about TB, meningitis. Absolutely terrifying,
Yeah,
honestly.
TB. Yeah, I mean, I got exposed to TB a couple years ago from a family friend in the Ukrainian community. where that kind of thing still exists.
Hmm.
And it's kind of scary because it that I didn't know that, but like you can get TB and have it for 20 years.
Yeah, it's meant to be dormant, isn't it?
For
My
Yeah.
my little sister had it when she was young. She was incredibly sick, hospitalized. It was
So
scary.
TB in the UK,
Yeah.
that's very rare, isn't it?
Yeah, this was 25 years ago. But yeah, super rare. I
Wow.
don't think I've ever heard anyone else have it actually.
Yeah.
Um,
So we had a friend have it, and of course we had to get X-rays to make sure that we didn't have it, which it is not that easy to spread, as people are sort of afraid of it.
not like smallpox. I don't know if you remember reading about that, how it was in a lab, I think somewhere in the US, I think New Hampshire maybe, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. And a scientist was doing various tests on this sample of smallpox. So basically, there's a few samples left across the entire world of smallpox, just in case, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And
Well, to be
essentially,
fair, yes, I think they still do need to have it. I
yeah,
think
yeah,
there's
of course, yeah.
because
Um,
you do need to be able to test, sort of.
Well, if variants pop up
Yeah, exactly.
that have been dormant for a very long time out in society, then yeah, you need it. But anyway, this guy was doing various tests and um, taking precautions as he's trained to, presumably. And someone on the floor below or above was working and basically contracted it through the ventilation system.
Yeah.
I mean, that's wild.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of, but it is kind of crazy that, I mean, I think now an infectious agent like that is held at a level 4 isolation facility where there is no integrated ventilation or anything like that.
Oh wow. I'd be
So
super interested to know what the other levels are. What's level 5?
there's a level 4 is the I believe level 4 is the top. So
Okay.
so essentially, I read about it in that Crichton book. What was it called? The one that became a movie with Dustin Hoffman.
Contagion?
No, Contagion isn't Contagion. The one with Matt Damon.
I forget. I did see it, but
The Outbreak, it was called.
okay.
Yeah, so
Not seen it.
so in that book it's focusing on a fictional outbreak of Marburg virus, which is related to Ebola, but it's extremely virulent.
Hmm.
And in it, they discuss the levels, and as far as I know, the level 4, which is the highest level, essentially, they are working in this kind of um, completely sealed environment where even the the HVAC and the air pressure is kept at a lower pressure than the outside,
Wow.
so that, and they go through airlocks so that when they open the airlocks, the air can only come
Of
in
course.
instead of out.
Yeah. Yeah. Genius.
Yeah, and there's various other like major precautions of how they do everything.
Mm.
But it's like those are there's only a handful of those in the world, right?
Hmm.
So, and then, like, the lower levels basically are different levels of precaution, but still, the book is also about how still all those precautions have their weaknesses.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
with this book, I enjoyed it as I enjoy Bill Bryson's writing, but unlike with At Home or with A Short History, I missed a bit of the story. I missed a bit
Mm.
of what is the journey that we're on. Um, and maybe I wanted more of a history. Maybe I wanted more history of our understanding of biology.
Mm.
Talking about how people came to understand the body, how they used to think about the body, and we only get little snatches of that because the book is really trying to be comprehensive about the body.
Mm.
I don't know. Did you have any criticisms like that?
Um, No, not actively. I can see your perspective, as you explain it. Um, I agree. I preferred A Brief History of Everything. Um, I haven't I haven't read what was the other book that you mentioned, the architecture one?
At Home.
At Home. Yeah, I haven't read that yet. That's on my list. Um, but yeah, I enjoyed it.
Mm.
I think a lot of those leading and interesting topics coming out of it. Um, I think there was enough on the page to come away with those thoughts. I'm not sure why he didn't focus on them or take them any further. I'm not sure.
Well, also I would think about Bryson's sort of age, and
How old is he?
he's in his I think he's in his 70s now.
Okay.
Uh,
Is he retired now?
he's
I think he might
well,
be, right?
he's not obviously if he's writing books.
I think this might have been his last book before he retired, but then maybe I recently read that he came out of retirement. I'm not sure. He's old, but
You're right. He said he was retiring in 2020, but then he did an audiobook in 2022
I,
called "The
I
Secret
really
History of
enjoyed
Christmas."
I really enjoyed his narration. By the way,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm happy to hear that he's come out of retirement to do more of that if he is. If that's the plan.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's 72. Like, I got the sense from this book, and um, it surprised me a little bit that it felt like a lot of it was written by researchers, in the sense of, he had a long list of things that he wanted to talk about, and he had researchers, gather a lot of information, and then
Mm,
he wrote from the research.
mm,
I didn't get the sense, as I often did in the past, that it was motivated by his own curiosity, if you know what I mean.
mm.
And I think that's maybe the key thing that I was
Missing.
missing from it. Because Bryson, it's one of those things of like, when someone becomes a brand,
Mm.
then they have a style, and then they have, a sort of output that is expected from them.
Right. You're picking up his book with an expectation of you know his previous work.
Yeah, and that has to be, in my opinion, strongly motivated by what you're interested in.
Mm.
And if it's not, then it's sort of pro forma. And this, for a last book, this felt like, you know less than it could have been. Maybe that's why he wants to retire. Maybe he's just, not as curious anymore, not as interested.
Mm.
Which I completely understand, being 72 and being hugely successful.
Mm.
And he's written lots of different kinds of books, and he experimented with. He did a memoir about his childhood. He's done travel books. He's done a book on language, science. He did a biography of Shakespeare. Did you read that one?
No, no,
Yeah,
I haven't.
that's really good, by the way. So, he did a history of one summer in America, which is 1927. That's the kind of thing that I really like from Bryson, where it's like he went, uh, for whatever reason, he he saw that the summer of 1927 in America was interesting, and he wrote a whole book about how it connects with, well, so many things, like, the about music and about
And
technology.
that's what he's good
Yeah,
at least in the past, is kind of creating these links, talking about these links that perhaps not many other people make, or
yeah,
at least talk about.
yeah. I mean, he, like, almost, you would like the book on, one summer America 1927. That's almost a book about, like, I stayed up all night clicking through Wikipedia links, you know what I mean, and here's what I
Mm.
found out. It's like that's fun. And it gives you a really, he
I mean,
had really.
perhaps there was a technical challenge doing that with this kind of book. I mean, he's not a doctor. Uh, presumably he was using information he captured from researchers, as you say, so he wouldn't have had a deep knowledge or context.
Yeah.
So maybe that was why it was just the limitation of the topic. But it may still be a topic that he's actively interested in, presumably. Otherwise, he wouldn't write about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, like when he wrote a short history, I don't know if you remember the foreword to that, but he said specifically that he was he was getting into his 40s and 50s, and he
Mm.
felt like he didn't know the things that when he was 10 years old he
Yeah.
thought that he should.
Yes.
He was looking at his childhood science book and thinking, when I'm grown up, I'm going to understand this, and then he didn't, and
I
he spent
loved I loved that the
yeah
introduction to that book actually.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then he found out a lot of the answers to the questions he had as a kid where we don't know,
Mm.
which is great,
Which
um,
everyone else had those same questions.
yeah. And he actually, I don't know if you probably never saw this, but that book actually has an illustrated version for kids, and I bought that for my son, and we read it, and he loved it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it's great because it's episodic, and it gives you actually more information than the book has in some ways, but also it simplifies.
Mm.
And it's great because it really does parallel the curiosity of a child.
Mm.
It really tries to tell you, not just to tell you things, but to tell you how we know things.
Mm.
And I felt the body, it was trying to tell you about the body and tell you and give you that sense of the absurdity of the human body. But it didn't have that drive, that curiosity. Just something that I don't know. Each section wanted its own book practically.
Mm.
Maybe that's just sometimes you.
But then the theory of everything was, was colossal in complexity. I mean, he was literally talking about the history of science,
Yeah.
and he had to keep that high level as well.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that redeemed that book, I mean, if you think about, he spent 3 years researching that book,
Mm.
and also he traveled extensively to research it. He went to places to try to highlight each part of it, but somehow I don't know, just somehow it came together in a different kind of way, and it didn't feel cursory, even though it is, right?
Mm.
Uh, I don't know. Maybe it's my age too. Like what short history came out 20 years earlier,
Yeah.
and maybe if I read that for the first time today, I would have a different reaction.
Maybe I've not read it in over 10 years for sure.
Yeah, and I read it when it came out, so that was almost, that was 20 years ago. So I didn't. I hadn't finished even university yet. I think I was just out of high school.
Mm.
So it's yeah, it certainly, it taught me a great lesson, which is that curiosity is often rewarded in ways that we don't expect,
Mm.
which is
Yeah.
a great lesson. uh,
So if you were to extrapolate any lessons from the body, can you? And if so, what are they? What were they for you?
uh, the human body is absurd. um, that's
Yeah, man.
uh, which I guess
By God.
I guess maybe because I already sort of knew that. But
Yeah.
the human body is absurd, and what we think we know about it, and what science claims to know about it, is often questionable at
And
best.
I think he describes that across history, by the way,
Mm,
and I think that history tends to cycle, and it's repeating itself now in the context of consciousness or AI, for example.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I took that as way as well. Anything else?
Uh, that it was his discussion of how much the elements in your book would cost if they were assembled. That was an interesting section. Do you remember this?
No,
Uh,
remind me.
where it was that thing of you probably were heard this in high school that your body costs 8 pounds 90,
Oh, yes.
and then he did a calculation where he's like, no, actually, if you look at like the elements, pure elements, if they could be
Purified, yeah.
purified and extracted, then it would cost like closer to 100,000 pounds,
Hmm.
basically. That was an interesting argument.
Yeah.
The other one is about cancer, like you always have cancer.
Yeah.
That's weird. Like
I
you
knew that actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is weird. It's disconcerting, but our immune systems. Do you know? It was interesting actually. The way he described immune systems, they're so hacky. It sounds like kind of computer networking,
Well, it
which
is.
is an absolute mess, but it works and it can be quite reliable. But the immune system seems to work in the same fashion. It's kind of slice and dice, hack and it just kind of hacks itself.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, the way that the immune system works is yeah, it's freaky. And it's hard to kind of understand. It
well, and it's also surprising it's reliable
Yeah.
because and I guess it comes down to pure numbers. I don't know how many T cells we have in our bodies right now, but I'm guessing it's a huge number to make it work.
Yeah, it's like it's measured in the thousands per milliliter of blood. I think it's like
Yeah, it's crazy.
huge numbers. And the way that autoimmune diseases happen, where the immune system is attacking different parts of the body, that's also like that's freaky. And
I mean, when you put things in perspective, people forget that the numbers at the scale of very small are shockingly bigger than the numbers we're familiar with. Even when you consider the number of stars, let's say, in the visible universe, you have more atoms in your body.
Yeah.
Just your body, you have more atoms by a magnitude than there are visible stars, not in the Milky Way, but the entire universe. And that kind of does put it into perspective as to why perhaps it's so bloody complicated.
Yeah, and the human body contains, more species of microbes and bacteriophages
Yeah.
than there are animals in the animal kingdom. Like practically.
Yeah.
So that's like,
It's crazy.
Millions of species.
Oh, and do you remember this? This was fascinating how we have all of this complexity and we can achieve so much, right? And yet your brain operates on 20 watts of power, which is less than like a dim light bulb. And it's not even just your brain. I mean, generally, the average adult consumes what, 2,500 calories, something like that. That's enough energy to light let's say, 100-watt bulb for a day.
Yeah.
Like, how is that even possible? Surely there's, science going on here that is profoundly more advanced than AI, for example.
Yeah. I mean, it sheds a lot of light on the fact that we really, really don't understand where consciousness is seated, where it comes from, and that there's nothing, which is what I've often suspected, that there's actually nothing special about the human brain at all. That that simply it has adapted to being, a brain of a species that does the things that we do, not that it's in any way exceptional, in its structure or its abilities. It's just evolved to do those things. And there's also the possibilities we've often talked about, that the possibility that our consciousness somehow is operating on a sort of
fundamental level, yeah,
a fundamental quantum level, which can't be fully understood through chemistry or through classical physics, right?
And I would say reading this book has actually filled the body with more mystery. Going into this book, I thought, obviously my objective reading this book is to understand the body more. But actually, I come out with many, many, many more questions that I know cannot be answered.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did find it fascinating in that regard. It kind of posed more questions than answered them.
Yeah, I think it in that way it's a very clear sort of 21st century text, which was, you and I
What do
were
you mean?
raised. Well, I'll explain. You and
Mm,
I were raised in the age, 80s and 90s, where the common sentiment was this end of history, end of scientific advancement period, where we were beginning to understand the fundamental things, getting a full picture of everything. And we were going to understand how the brain works. We were going to understand how DNA works. We were going to understand the universe. All these questions were going to be answered, right? um and and it's that thing of like, all the remaining questions are details.
mm.
But what we found, uh in especially I would say in the last 10 or 15 years, is that the things that we felt were settled and finished are vastly more complicated. It was sort of like, when did we sequence the human genome for the first time? It was like in the late 90s, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And people sort of looked at that and they went, okay, we get it, right? And then scientists were looking at it and they're like, okay, we sequenced the DNA, but you have like 99% more supposed junk, things that we don't understand what it does, than you have DNA that we do understand what it does. Uh, but and then people were starting to question, okay, what does it actually do? And then we understand there's epigenetics, right? The
Hmm.
expression of the genes, not just the genes themselves, but how they're expressed and which ones are expressed, and how species can sort of pop into existence from related species, in times of of ecological change. And suddenly we thought we were understanding the fundamental basis of evolution,
Mm.
DNA, and then we understood, no, we don't even understand the fundamental basis
Well, doesn't
of
he actually talk about this? I think he
yeah,
talks about, I forget, is it telomeres or something?
telomeres, yeah.
Yeah,
But that's
yeah,
just that's just the aging part of it.
yeah. But
Yeah.
we when we first discovered that, we thought, okay, we've unlocked how to stop aging, or how
But
to at
no,
least control it to an extent. And then with a little more research, we realized absolutely not.
absolutely not. And we don't even now think that we understand, how evolution really works on a fundamental level. When like this isn't in this book, but there's examples now where we used to think, for example, if you destroyed an ecology like a forest, and all the sort of um, unique species of that forest would die, right?
Hmm.
And then what we what we found from wilderness areas that have actually regrown is that the species, the niches that seemed to have been destroyed, will sort of, in a sense, almost pop back into existence. And what happens is that when you have an ecology that's growing, you have a process where existing species quickly evolve using epigenetic processes to refill niches that have been sort of eliminated.
Interesting.
And essentially, what it looks like, it's not this, but what it looks like is this overnight re-evolution of a species. So it brings a fundamental question to, we used to think, if a species either exists or doesn't exist. But now what we understand is that it can sort of continue to exist in some form, in the epigenome of other species. And
So the
then
DNA is kind of retained through other means,
it makes sense if
non-conventional.
yeah,
Yeah.
if one species evolves into three variants and two of those variants die, and the first variant spreads to those other ecologies,
Yeah.
All of the same basic epigenetic information was already there. So
Mm.
it's just re-evolving to the same, sort of form in a way. Yeah, so despeciation is also something that we need to reevaluate.
Mm.
Or our idea that once something is gone, it's really completely gone. That's maybe not entirely true. And it also like that has drawn into question, for example, the narrative that the dinosaurs went extinct because of one event, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what we find is actually not really, right. They evolved quickly.
Mm.
They evolved into birds. They, many of them survived, and the genes survived.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's we know less than we did when I was a kid, I think.
It seems so. Yeah.
Which is a good thing. Every it feels like, I think probably every century people say that now is the time when the fundamental questions have been answered, and now we're only focused on the details, right?
Sure. But the human arrogance seems to remain, unfortunately, in many industries.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Um,
arrogance is the biggest danger, because it causes us to think that we understand things when we don't. I mean, the bits.
and especially when yeah, especially when you're acting on those things, right? We
Yeah.
spoke earlier about how a lot of technology is actually dehumanizing, and I think that that's kind of what we're talking about here, is the arrogance of presuming what we know now is right, and actually history over and over again tells us when we think we're right. A lot of the time, we're only capturing part of the story. So
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing right now. I find it actually somewhat uh, let's say, somewhat heartening to see the popular and actually quite clever and cogent popular response to people like Sam Altman of OpenAI
oof.
about the idea that LLMs. So for our listeners, LLMs are large language models, which are transformer technology using neural networks, digital neural networks. The conceit of the current technology guru space is that we are recreating something like, not like human consciousness, but general artificial intelligence, right?
And
That
I think there have been claims for human like, comparatively like consciousness.
Yeah, and what people are responding with quite cogently, I think, is pointing out that this stuff, it is designed to imitate, is designed to fool us, but it does not actually do what it's being claimed to do.
Right.
And there's lots of problems right now with. I can't imagine being a university professor in 2024 and having to deal with this shit, because you are looking at, really. I mean, can you imagine? You are
Mm,
looking at a technology that is making your job impossible. Like,
mm,
how can you tell your students who are 18 years old, how can you tell them, don't go on Microsoft Copilot, don't go on Chat GPT and ask it questions to write your essay?
mm.
How can you tell them not to do that? Like, how can you stop them from doing it?
Actually, it's an interesting topic you bring up more generally. Is like, I my personal belief around AI, which is a field that both Lloyd and I are very much into, deep into, I would say. And I've challenged numerous times the claims that industry leaders have made in regards to AI's capabilities. But there's no doubting that AI as a tool for doing these kinds of things that you just mentioned, research in the context of, I don't know, an essay or a report or something like that, is incredibly powerful. What are the implications on education? And what can we actually even do about it? I mean, obviously, I know there are some models that can discern AI generated content
But
from not.
even even that, if I launder that, if I just ask questions to ChatGPT and then I write the thing myself, I'm not
Exactly.
even rewording it. I'm still relying on it. To what extent is that a bad thing? There's an open question. But yeah, if we start creating what we call human expression based on this stuff, and based on a misunderstanding of what it is and what value it has, that's very scary.
Well, and we're losing an incredibly important step, which is the curation of human intelligence,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Because human intelligence used to be expressed via things like writing, photography, art. If those things can be generated based on a statistical analysis of what exists, pretty soon a lot of what exists is based on that statistical analysis. And we've
exactly.
talked in the past about the concept of model collapse.
Mhm.
And there are some arguments that that kind of thing is going to be much sooner than we think.
It's very hard to predict, but yeah.
Yeah,
And I think the other challenge here is not only the actual output, the content output, but also the process. And what I mean by that is you don't really learn something like that. You
right,
learn something by unlocking patterns in the way that you think about things.
right.
And if you just type a prompt into ChatGPT and it spits out an answer for you, which you regurgitate in an essay, you haven't learned that.
No,
You will not be able to dip into that knowledge in 3 to 6 months' time, link that to another compelling piece of knowledge you've just, you know, acquired, and turn that into something new.
yeah,
And that's what learning really is being able to unlock those patterns, reuse them in other contexts. Now, and so the implication of AI isn't just the output, it's also actually we're going to have a generation of stupid people.
yeah. And people who are good at appearing to know things without knowing them.
Right, right,
um
exactly.
yeah, and you can already see that. Now everyone is an expert in everything. We try to
Mm,
we try to focus on original works that are that are the product of of a unique process. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure even when we look at a book like this is like 4 years ago.
mhm,
Probably already there's an influence from artificially curated content,
mm.
from search engines, for example. And now, I mean, gosh, you look at Google search, you can't even find what you're looking for anymore,
Yeah,
because all this, the internet has become completely full of all this pablum.
it's become enshittified.
Yeah. I mean, to the extent of like, it's amazing. A couple of times now, I admit, I have opened, like, not ChatGPT, but opened Microsoft Copilot to look for something because I just couldn't find it on Google anymore.
Oh,
Um,
dude! I mean, I'm guilty as charged. I use ChatGPT on a daily basis, and don't get me wrong, there are some things that AI can really, really help humans with, and should. But those aren't the kind of things that it's been used for.
no, yeah,
You know,
it should be able to. You should say, give me a chapter list of this book.
right?
That's the kind of
Exactly.
thing that it should be able to do for you. A search,
But
not
look, we're talking about health and the body. I mean, AI in medical research, there is a legitimate role that AI can help us with in terms of simulations and stuff like that. AI is really good at that. You
yeah.
know, we can't build a real time simulation with our hands or
but
with
but
words.
in every case, it's vastly overplayed how much of a fundamental role the AI is playing. It's always an assistant, a helpful tool, but it's never the center of the process. And now people who are listening to this, I'm sure you've already been told that things like an AI recognized tuberculosis from the voice of a patient.
Mm.
This is not true, actually. It's not true. If you go into those claims, those claims are false, you know.
Have you seen the? I think it was a research team in Kyoto or Osaka or somewhere in Japan. Um, Probably clickbait. I haven't actually done much due diligence on it, but it was basically saying how AI, by looking at a large volume of MRI scans, was able to digitally re-project what that person was thinking at the time. So the study was that this person was sitting in an MRI. They were shown an image of a giraffe, a plane, a sunny landscape, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And the AI was able to redraw, and obviously, somewhat abstract, but you could tell there was like a giraffe with like dots on it and a landscape with the sun and all this kind of stuff. That actually was in Google Scholar. I'm not sure, again, the validity of that.
It
Um,
sounds, but it's interesting. Things like that, absent a lot of context, they sound amazing, right? But what is it actually saying? That's the thing. When you go deep into a lot of those things, often what it's saying actually is that, um, if you put someone in an active MRI, you show them a bunch of pictures over and over again, you image their brain, and then you take images of their brain without showing them something, or without telling the AI what you're showing them. The AI can then over time guess, right?
mhm.
But that doesn't mean that if I put you, Will, in an MRI today and show you something, an AI can guess what you're seeing.
Or it can read your mind or anything
No,
like that. And
no.
and actually, this is less talking about AI, in my opinion. It's more talking about elements of consciousness and brain function, which is actually more interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and what is it actually describing? If it's taking, there's the old saying, I think, remains very true. The map is not the territory, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Which
yeah,
is,
yeah.
you can map the brain and you can map the functions. That does not mean that you understand the territory. Doesn't mean
Yep.
you understand how it's working.
Mm,
Because how it's working is it's never all one thing. um, and as soon as we
yep.
think we understand that, we find an angle that we didn't know about.
Mm,
Yeah, and if uh, if it was this simple, I'd each of those stories about AI these days, and people are seeing it in these curated lists of achievements that AI has made. A lot of those are frankly bullshit.
mm,
A lot of them are based on, very often a misunderstanding of the science from people that are not in that field. People who maybe they are focused on building AI, but they're not focused on, they don't understand biochemistry, or they don't understand neurology.
mm.
People in those fields are not making those claims. So, it's I think it's another one of those situations where we really are starting to be overconfident about how much we understand.
Yeah, I actually saw a video of Mark Zuckerberg recently, and I was quite pleased with his, um, I would say, more reserved attitude towards AI.
Mm-hmm.
He made it very clear that he does believe in AI, but also recognizes that conventional learning algorithms have this compute efficiency frontier. For anyone who doesn't know that, it basically means that as you improve, there's basically two knobs that you can improve for AI to improve efficacy, which is power, compute basically, and data.
Yeah.
And generally, if you increase those two things, then the output is better.
Right.
And as we build better and better models using these learning algorithms, what actually happens when you look at them from an algorithmic view is that you see diminishing returns. So it actually gets harder and harder to have any significant um, improvements. Now, those were the older learning algorithms, and we are using these generative learning algorithms, and we haven't reached that line yet. Um, but something Mark Zuckerberg was basically saying is that he acknowledged that the old way there were these unforeseeable boundaries that they didn't know about, and it's likely that the new algorithms have those same limitations.
Yeah,
And I found that very refreshing that he was actually very open about that. If you compare that with Sam Altman, as you said, who's 100% certain that they're going to be conscious and at AGI within a year, and all these
I think that's
wild,
complete.
frankly,
I think it's
claims.
complete nonsense.
It
Uh,
is.
it and
It
it's
really is.
and it's and it's coming from someone who clearly doesn't understand the technology at
He's
all.
not technical, dude.
No, no, and he's a salesman for startups. I mean, and he's always been that, which is fine. But like that doesn't, continually promising the world like that is not gonna, it doesn't make it true. And the fact is, things people may have to get used to this idea that actually, uh, you know, maybe 90% of what generative AI can do, it already does. Uh,
I actually pretty much believe that.
Yeah, so do I. I think if there was going to be this, 10x improvement every 2 years, which is what they're sort of that's the promise essentially. I think we would see it, and we don't.
Don't you find it just almost funny, the hysteria and the hype
Yeah,
that's going into this, even from like the VCs? These guys are considering to spending, frankly, $100 billion on nuclear reactors
yeah,
to make this thing happen, which
yeah,
has a very high chance that there is diminishing returns, this very real diminishing returns. That's going to mean that all of these promises don't really come to fruition.
yeah, yeah.
I just find that so funny,
Well,
and it sums up the VC industry so well.
yeah, and it's amazing how the hype cycle has moved to this place where the promises involve, such expenditure of resources that as we've never, seen before. It
And
used
it's
to be,
part of the hype.
yeah,
That's kind of what's even feeding the hype itself.
yeah.
Is the concept of spending the money.
Oh, I think, yeah. I mean, I think that the governments they're interested because they're thinking, oh my God, you're going to spend $250 billion. That's a lot of that's a lot of economic output. What
Mm,
no matter what you do with it. But
true.
increasingly, like these technologies have made these huge promises and then required, and the same thing happened with like crypto, right? They make huge promises, but they require just ungodly amounts of resources,
Mm,
for a very uncertain return.
mm.
And yeah, we're so far continually willing to pay that price. Now there'll be a nice big collapse, when the new models are just, 5% better than the old models, and but
Well,
the
has that
cost.
not already happened? I know the 1.0, the 1.0, sorry, preview that's been in preview since September with ChatGPT is having its full release, or has had its full release a few days ago, which apparently is far better. And this, by the way, is not to do with the learning algorithm or any of those improvements I mentioned earlier. This is simply that it can now reason. And all that means is that it's basically not using models, but using sequential, conventional programming techniques to basically ask a number of questions that lead to the question that you've asked.
Right,
And they call that reasoning,
right,
and they're basically selling that as a improved model. It's not really an improved model, actually.
right, right.
And so it's all just it's smoke and
and
mirrors.
it's gonna I mean, well, yeah, because uh each time they make an improvement, that improvement is going to involve, a 10x, higher expenditure. How much is the next chat gpt model going to cost to train? $10 billion,
Mm, yeah.
$20 billion, and at
Mm,
that point, when it doesn't provide any additional benefit, or
yeah.
very marginal additional benefit, they won't be able to sell it. um
Yeah.
they
And this is
already.
another thing. This is another reason why Zuckerberg's in my good books at the moment. Probably won't be for long, but is that, of course, their model is open source as well. It's completely transparent.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's the way it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean he has his own blind spots,
Of course he does. Yeah.
but I think yeah I think he sees it as like there's not really there's not really a growth industry there. There's spam, which is people will just stop using his social media networks, which they've already to a great extent stopped doing because of spam.
Mm.
So I don't know. It's starting to be like even in communities that I follow, like on Reddit, people will now say, hey, according to Chat GPT, you're wrong, and I'll just respond to that with, uh, don't care, don't
Mm.
care, not interested. Like, have you
Yeah.
have you seen this yet? Someone going, no, Chat GPT says you're wrong.
Of course. Yeah. Of course.
I don't know what to respond to that. It's like it's like people 20 years ago said Google says you're wrong.
Mm.
When it's like, no, Google doesn't. You asked a question in a specific way and you got the answer you were looking for, right?
So earlier we mentioned just passing, really, or actually a few times, the idea of evolution. I felt that reading the book, there were many points where it really felt it really hit home actually as to how imperfect our bodies are.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned the immune system earlier, which is again a bit of a mess, but it works. But not always.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm just thinking in terms of where humanity is at now. I mean, generally, it feels less like our bodies are adapting to fit our environment. Instead, we're changing the environment to fit our biologies. Um, I guess that's both good and bad. What's I mean, and also on the other side of that is a lot of things we're doing now are kind of really technologically damaging our biologies. Obviously, diet.
And our ecology. Yeah.
Exactly. Any thoughts on that? Did you find this book to be thought provoking in that direction at all? I did.
Not as much as some others I've read.
Mm.
But sure. What did it bring up for you that you
Well,
hadn't thought of?
really, those kind of things I mentioned. Generally, something that I tend to do, whether it's diet or use of technology, is I just try to think about how we behaved thousands of years ago
Mm,
with the same bodies that we have now then, right? For example, all the foods that we eat now have incredibly high sugar content. Sugar's a new thing. We didn't really have so much processed sugar back then. Probably not a good idea to have that in your diet, right?
mm.
um, that's obviously food tech.
I think I, th-
With
I think one thing that the book doesn't talk about much, which maybe I would have enjoyed, is the fact that actually, on the other side, humans have been, when you look at the all the food that humans eat, right? We spent thousands, and in some cases tens of thousands of years cultivating those foods into what they are today.
Mm,
Almost everything, we think of there being a natural, when we talk about organic food and this kind of thing, as a natural, you know type of food, or a traditional way of growing food. That's complete nonsense, right? because
mm.
because every fruit, an orange, it did not exist in nature. An orange that you would eat today, and even an orange 500 years ago, didn't really exist in nature. We'd
You
been
mean in the sense of how sweet they are now, for example?
everything we cultivated them.
Yeah,
Every fruit and vegetable that we eat, we cultivated from a completely different base material. you
yeah,
know Corn, it literally, 10,000 years ago, corn was grass, Bermuda grass.
yeah.
Like, and we, in 10,000 years, cultivated that into something completely different. And that's true of most of the base materials of our food. It's true of rice, wheat, millet.
Yeah, I mean, carrots used to be purple. Apples
Yeah.
used to be pretty much as sweet as your standard vegetable.
Well, and an apple used to be the size of a cherry, and
Yeah,
yeah, and hard as a rock. I mean, we completely changed the way the way the plant kingdom sort of functions. So, like, to me, humans always change their ecology, uh, and always do so on sort of limited information, right?
Hmm.
So maybe it's more interesting to me, that we continually think that we're approaching the frontier of like complete understanding, and then realizing that we're not even close.
Again, a repeating pattern through history, and I think that is the case.
Yeah.
Um,
So I don't know. I've never bought into the idea that there is a way. I think human bodies, like I said at the beginning, are absurd and don't work. And you know, there's a book. Do you know? You ever read anything by Christopher Hitchens? Um,
as in literature, or
or any of his books? He wrote "God Is Not Great," which is
I know about it. I haven't
yeah,
read it. No.
it's an interesting book, and I think it makes a much more trenchant claim, or much more trenchant argument against sort of the idea of an ideal, human form, or an ideal human existence. Um, and essentially, I mean, his argument is religious. He's talking about the idea of the Garden of Eden, right?
Hmm.
And the perfect human, and the apple, and all this stuff. And he's pointing out, the apple doesn't exist. The modern human doesn't exist, right? There's not. These are fluid concepts. The way the human, use the example of the human eye, the way that it evolved, is completely absurd and stupid, and would never be something that you would ever choose to do. It's just that at each individual step, it evolved according to, a given pressure at the time,
Mm.
and it ended up where it ended
Well,
up.
I guess the shift though is in today's society as we thoroughly um, transition from collectivism to individualism is that we don't care about evolution. We don't care about the survival of our species. Perhaps Elon Musk would beg to differ.
do
But
are we transitioning to individualism? We're more collectivist than maybe ever, you know I mean,
mm,
think
you mean at
about
a more macro scale?
well, think about, like, food safety regulations, international trade, currency exchange. Like,
Perhaps I'm being pessimistic.
maybe I think, like, there's a
But
lot.
but regardless, the point I'm making is, I guess, less about that. It's more about surely the reality that we care about our individual biologies as an opposed to the collective ability to evolve. Right? That's not really
Uh,
something I wake up and think about in in the context of what we're talking about here, i.e., how technology can disrupt. Um, evolution, how it can disrupt our ability to live healthy lives, etc.
yeah, I think our
Perhaps,
our
yeah.
economy our economy is geared towards promising people individual control, over their bodies, or over their biology, and the reality is that we don't exercise a lot of individual control.
Mm,
We can exercise more collective control,
mm,
which is why we're having a lot of these diseases of overconsumption, because we are given a lot of individual choice, but not a lot of collective choice.
mm,
So, you can choose not to drink sugary soda, or eat processed corn, or whatever, but collectively, those are the things that are available and cheap.
sure.
So, we're not using our collective ability to actually affect,
And
to
if that collective ability is symbolic of evolution, perhaps somewhat,
yeah.
it seems like evolution now is tarnishing our personal abilities to live healthy lives because of that overconsumption, for example, which, as you said, the economy is geared towards. So, and that's not just overconsumption of food, by the way. I'm talking about everything.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've done this, but like if I wake up in the morning and do a super high dopamine task,
Mm.
I actually, and I've done this. Like maybe it won't work for you, whatever, and you can think what you can. But I can say for me, if I do that, if I do a really high dopamine task in the morning, my motivation later is noticeably less. If I start my morning with low reward tasks,
Mm.
harder tasks, and then by the evening I transition to the higher reward tasks, I have a much more proactive, fulfilling day to a noticeable degree.
It's
Um,
yeah. Well,
so, so
it's something also that like cloisters have been aware of for hundreds of years, right? Because they
yeah,
wake up in
yeah,
the morning and they immediately do the hardest work of the day, which is writing.
yeah,
And then they actually go back to sleep. They wake up and they eat.
yeah. And it seems like the collective. We keep saying that it actually seems to be technology. Like it seems like a lot of technology and hype around this technology. And I'm even more concerned about AI in this regard, as we do bring that up a lot because it's so topical. But I find these super concerning. Um, in the context of our well-being, and we're obviously talking about the body in this context.
Yeah.
I find it really concerning.
Yeah, it it is, but I, it's God, it's hard to say. This book, I would say, maybe that was one of my main complaints. It didn't give me uh, a sense either way, of pessimism or optimism. It sort of confirmed things that I already know.
Yeah.
And I'm maybe like you. I am looking a little bit recently for maybe this is sort of a false promise too of like a new paradigm, a new
Mm,
way of understanding what the problem is. I think that there is definitely a shared social lack of understanding of what is the problem that we're actually facing right
I'd
now.
love to read a book about that. I don't know if anyone knows one, but that I'd find that super interesting if anyone has written about.
There are so many there are so many possibilities, right?
Yeah.
Climate change, is it evolution, is it history,
Yeah.
economics? Everyone has an answer.
Mm,
But is there a paradigm level sort of argument?
mm,
And I don't know, is there a Marx for the 21st century? Someone who can uh, provide us with a kind of uh, a hypothesis for the paradigm that we exist in. I mean,
mm,
there have been. I shouldn't say that doesn't exist. There have been uh, people like that. People like Guy Debord or Derrida, right? But
mm,
they haven't caught the popular imagination yet.
mm,
They haven't been filtered into a common understanding um, yet. You know,
mm,
instead we have seemingly the only popular philosophy texts are all you know idiotic Jordan Peterson's creeds and things of that nature.
yeah, the Jordan Peterson and Robert Greens,
Oh
etc.
God! Oh
Yeah,
God! Yeah, just horrible.
or
Just
dare I say
horrible.
Andrew Tate? Unfortunately,
Ugh,
that's it's a thing these days.
just horrible.
Yeah, really, really destructive. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, in terms of conclusions, I mean, there was one other thing that came to mind actually just before we go to that. Um, that did get me thinking about a few things. Again, topical, at front of mind for me, is the longevity industry, which recently, in recent years, has promised all kinds of weird and wonderful things. They've claimed that they've reversed, uh, not stopped, reversed aging in mice,
Yeah.
which is one thing. And it's actually quite fascinating. That is fascinating. It seems to be true that they have achieved that at least. Clearly, there are some implications for humans. We aren't mice at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
But it is super interesting. It's an interesting space. We've seen billionaires fund billions into that industry. I think there's I forget their name, affiliated with Oxford University. Anyway, they've received a big tranche of funding. I think it was last year, and it's interesting. Again, I think reading this book really questions that, challenges that. Um, Again, so many case studies and examples in this book of discoveries through history that have presumed to solve, you know, X or Y and
Yeah.
actually haven't.
I think, yeah, I think like I think it'll be interesting to see if we make a huge breakthrough in longevity, and then we find out that actually like the somehow the bacteria in your body, uh, keeps you
Yeah,
alive,
exactly.
or that cancer, just goes mental on you after 110 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know,
Look, I mean, it's actually there are some moral questions with longevity, and I think for me, I think philosophically, consciously, there are big implications of, you know, the prospect of living forever. I mean, just imagine. But I think the key here is actually not necessarily living for longer, but having help your health for longer. And I find that to be very interesting. We've all had, you know, grandparents and family or
yeah,
friends or loved ones who have, you know, perhaps gone through you know, the aging process, and it's not been the best of rides. And you know, I'd love to see that.
it never is. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
I
But
think.
unfortunately, reading this book, it just seems to me it's kind of reinforced my skepticism really in the industry.
Yeah, yeah. I think I think skepticism is usually rewarded in the long term, right? I'm skeptical of anything like that. I suspect, even if we do figure out how to reverse aging, I suspect that we will find that the consequences of doing so are extreme and not bearable.
Yeah,
If billionaires tomorrow could find some way, just game it out, just say the billionaires of tomorrow could find some way to stop aging, and it costs billions of dollars, let's say. um what just the other day, uh this health insurance CEO got gunned down in New York, right? Did you see the
mm.
news about this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And people are cheering him across social media, the guy who
yeah.
killed him. And that's a small fish,
Mm.
in comparison. uh what do you think, realistically, what do you think would happen if we had a technology like that that was available to a small number?
Well, a few things. I mean, we've spoken about the kind of integrity or the ability to be democratic with um, dictatorship around data flow.
It's already
But
impossible.
also, but what's even worse is, you know, the whole point of death is a hard reset.
Yeah, to
Is
clear out
exactly the weeds.
yeah, well, just to clear, yeah, to clear the way. If you have people that are like Elon Musk, who are able to continually accumulate capital,
Right,
that's the end of capitalism,
right,
because it's done. Capitalism has finished, because that's all the capital ends up in one person's hands, and then the world, in a sense, ends. The world as we understand it,
yeah,
because there can be no more anything.
yeah.
And if today's billionaires were able to live forever, that state would quickly be reached.
Mm,
um,
I mean, I can. I'm kind of imagining some awful science fiction scenario where you have some like overlord, some immortal overlord of Mars, with Musk or someone,
but
and
why, the thing of all those sort of dystopias is, why would people tolerate it? They don't.
yeah,
They won't. It doesn't. It requires, fundamentally, even capitalism, even the inequality that we experience today requires popular consent.
and as you've said earlier, if you look at Sam Altman, for example, who has transitioned an open source and non-profit company into the polar opposite,
Yeah.
is getting a lot of pushback, and people are resisting his comments and agenda.
Yeah,
So
and
I think you're
if
right.
you think that Sam Altman is really going to put every writer in the world out of work, um, every customer service representative, every research assistant, every journalist, um, everything that that technology touches, and get more of that money for himself. You know, every screenwriter in Hollywood.
Mm,
You think that someone is not going to walk up behind him in New York and shoot
yeah.
him?
Mm,
I find that unlikely, and I find it strange that people like him are surprised
mm.
by what's happening, because that
Do you,
is.
by the way, do you think that trait is comes before or after? What I mean is, to become a billionaire, do you need to be like that, or
Yes,
becoming a billionaire makes you like that, or is it
I
both?
think you have to be like that. I think if you talk to these people, and how many billionaires have I talked to? Two people who
Mm,
maybe qualify as close to billionaires, and they're not like off-putting people, but they have a complete, as far as I can tell, a complete and deep-seated, abiding belief that they deserve what they get, that what they gain in life they earned, and it should
mm.
have come to them, and there's no questioning that, because if they were going to question it, then they wouldn't end up where they are, right?
I think so.
I mean, you founded companies. Can you imagine becoming a billionaire while your employees are just making a regular wage?
Absolutely not.
Right. So you're not going to do it. It's just you're not going to get there, because always in life you accumulate more, and you think in these terms as I do, which is you think of the things that you owe other people, that you owe
Mm.
society, and you take other people along with you as far as you go. And that necessarily means that you don't end up with all the toys, because you've been sharing this whole time.
But the shame here really is that it's too late before people realize that and start boycotting those people,
Yes.
because those people by definition have success because people have bought into it.
People
Now,
believe in
for
it.
example, the company that we run is, our not a single mission within our kind of mission statements is financial.
No.
Not a single one. It's about how we can impact and improve society.
And
And you would like to think that people get behind those kind of things, and whilst they do on occasion, they often don't.
well
And these
and
companies like OpenAI and other companies unfortunately end up holding the stage.
yeah, and people like Sam Altman get in charge of them, and shape them into what they need to be, to put those billions in their pockets, and then.
But then the worst bit is they pretend to be the kind of guys we are, and that kind of pisses me off.
Yeah, and
They get the money, they
yeah,
accumulate the wealth, and then they put their little act on.
and they talk the game, of yeah, that this is what they're doing and why they're doing it, and you and I see right through it, but a lot of people don't.
But they do eventually, at least.
Yeah, always too late.
It is, but
Always too late. But I think maybe it has surprised me recently that people like Peter Thiel, and Sam Altman, and
Mhm.
even fairly relatively well liked people like Mark Cuban are putting
Mhm.
themselves out in popular culture the way they are. Especially someone like Peter Thiel, who is a dyed in the wool fucking fascist.
He's
Uh,
a reptile,
if
dude.
you if you I mean if you read, like, no one reads it because it's barely readable, but read anything that he's written, like,
I've read his books ages
ugh,
ago. His lecture notebooks, one what is it? 0 to 1.
yeah,
I
that
read
is
that
the
ages
that
ago.
is the most business focused. If you read anything that he has to say about history, about politics, about society, it is frightening, the degree to which he uh, it's Hitlerian. Like I'm not trying to exaggerate. It's really deeply disturbing.
Mm.
And he's going on Joe Rogan and talking about like, and this is a guy who
Ugh.
has never built anything new, has never created, never invented anything. Doesn't have like a coherent plan for
I feel
society.
like I feel like that gang. It's like Joe Rogan, Musk,
Yeah.
Teal, all that. I mean, obviously now they're all empowered by Trump, right? They've
Yes.
literally got direct access to bias control.
That's why they picked him. That had nothing to do with his politics or personality, really. It's just that they could be in control. Um,
Oh, it's scary.
it is scary. It is scary. But also think, if you're scared and you see that people are scared and you see that people are reacting, do also trust human nature to a degree. That as these people become more powerful, the response also becomes more powerful.
Well, we spoke about this. Was it in the last podcast? I forget the name of the book about geopolitics and having faith in the collective, the kind of uh,
Yeah,
collective
the
agenda
end of the
of
world.
normal people.
The end of the world is just the beginning. Peter
That's the one.
Zahan. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And just having some faith that people people solve things
people
together.
people solve things, and the end of post capitalism is probably a good thing, because people get
Mm.
together and they come up with solutions. And some of those solutions are going to be scary. Some of the situations that are created are going to be scary.
And by
But
the way, just to clarify, we do tend to talk a lot about AI and it's doom and gloom and post capitalism, but actually, we actually have an optimistic outlook on that, and we do think that in fact AI and automation and these kinds of technologies that we've spoken about in the context of doom and gloom can um, be a vessel for good, and can be the complete opposite with certain policies and government decisions alongside that. We actually see that there could be a very positive future.
yeah, we work on automation technology, and the idea is to actually try to reduce the amount of time that people have to spend dealing with administrative digital work that is just taking up their attention.
and
And
and and is frankly boring them.
yeah,
Right? These tasks are oppressive and have been oppressive for hundreds of years, and humans should never have really been doing them in the first place. Who wants
yeah,
to sit there and put, I don't know, numbers from a spreadsheet to a PDF form? No one
or
should be
who
doing that.
wants to deal with billing and paying their bills
Right.
and
You should be spending more time with people, connecting with people, and enjoying life.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what we're about.
enjoying life, reading books.
Yeah. How about it?
So yeah, I think we do have an optimistic. I would say we have a belief that human beings are creative problem solvers, and that the problems that we have now, we will work on solutions. And historically, the bigger a problem gets, the more urgent the solution becomes,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore the more drastic the measure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're well past the point. I'm frankly surprised, and I'm not. By the way, this is not me promoting any kind of political violence, but I'm surprised, because I think we're well past the point that kind of thing became inevitable, and unsurprising. And it only surprises me that it hasn't happened already.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe we'll see more of it. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. But
Mm-hmm.
and then the repression that comes with that, and then the reaction to the repression, etc. So it'll be interesting times. You know,
It is.
not necessarily good, but
Well,
we
sometimes things need to go a little sour to get back on the right path.
and things are pretty sour. So
Everyone's feeling it, man.
yeah,
Like it's hard out there.
yeah, it is.
Um, but hey, back to the body and kind of a few tangents there. Back to the body and our kind of final takeaways. Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed this book. I always enjoy Bill Bryson. I wanted more in the sense of a narrative. It was to me a bit too comprehensive in the sense of talking about the human body, um, and not I don't know, didn't follow all the strings that I would have liked it to. But I enjoyed it, and I learned something from it, and I definitely don't regret reading it. What about you?
I think I echo that for the most part. I didn't come out of that feeling that I wanted more in terms of a narrative. Whilst I can see that, especially compared with some of his other books, I found it entertaining, mind blowing at times, all these kind of things that I would expect from a Bill Bryson book. He didn't disappoint in that department. I had a favorite quote that I found hilarious. I think he said, sperms are the astronauts of our biology. And it's because they're the only ones that go out of our body on a mission. And I just thought that was great. So,
Because it's
yeah,
weird. Yeah, it's a weird thing. It's a weird thing to do.
it is. It's strange.
Yeah.
But I like the way he put that. So anyway, I did enjoy it. I think it's worth reading. I hadn't read anything quite like it in terms of kind of comprehensive yet high level analysis of the body.
Yeah.
I'd never read anything like that before. So
yeah, that's what Bill Bryson's always been good for, and I hope it surprises me that more people don't echo this same sort of approach, but maybe he's just got that particular blend of curiosity and wit, you know. But apparently he's retiring, so
and he served us all very well. Thank you, Bill Bryson.
Yeah, I can't complain. Thanks, Bill Bryson. Read At Home if you really enjoyed this. That's to me a much more in many ways historically actionable book, if that makes sense. I often felt with this book that I was learning things that I couldn't do anything with.
That's true.
Well, and maybe it's true of At Home as well, but it did help me to kind of understand the absurdity of how people live, and absurdity is good. I like absurdity.
Well, this is a less tangible, perhaps, book, right? You don't necessarily see what he's saying play out.
Yeah, you can't see it around you. You might feel it in your own body, but it's hard to it's hard to believe that this kind of stuff is going on inside of you, even though it is.
So, do we know the book for next week, Lloyd?
I think that we're going to do a Roger Penrose book, The Emperor's New Mind. Is that right?
That's right, which kind of focuses a little more on consciousness and physics. It's going to be a bit of a heavier book, but I look forward to it.
Me too. Not next week, but in probably 2 weeks.
Right.
So look forward to that. And until then, I've been Lloyd.
And I've been Will.
This has been Two Bros, One Book. And we will see you next time.
Cheers. See ya.
My homie Strick told me, dude, finish your breakfast. So that's what I'ma do. Take you back to the dude with the Lexus. Fast forward the jewels and the necklace. Let me tell you, dudes, what I do to protect us. Shoot at you actors like movie directors. Say the movie, dogs.
Now, before I finish, let me just say, I did not come here to show out. Did not come here to impress you. Because to tell you the truth, when I leave here, I'm gone. And I don't care what you think about me. But just remember, when it hits the fan, brother, whether it's next year, 10 years, 20 years from now, you'll never be able to say that these brothers lied to you, Jack.
Thing ain't lie. I done came through the block and everything that